The Law&Crime Network, everybody. This is Jesse Weber, another sidebar in this case. I'm here with Jayne Weintraub, our criminal defense attorney for this morning. Jayne, you're hearing this guy being put under cross-examination. What do you think of his testimony?
I think he stands firm. I think that he's done a very good job of sticking to what he says he saw, despite the fact that the prosecutor kept trying to trick him up.
Yeah, Jayne, I think they might be going to a break. Let's just listen in, and we might be back here for more analysis.
Sure.
So, Sergeant, if you would, close your pads, leave them on your chairs. This will be approximately 15 minutes, maybe a little more.
Welcome back to the Law&Crime Network, everybody. This is Jesse Weber. Okay, so now they're taking a mid-morning break and a lot to discuss. I'm here with Jayne Weintraub. Jayne, let's talk a little bit about what we saw so far this morning. We saw the testimony of a witness the defense is putting on their case. Actually, to be more specific, Mr. Barrow is putting on his defense. And we saw the testimony of Javono Collins, a friend of all three of these individuals. Or was he a friend? That's the question. That's the question put forward. How do you think he did as a witness?
I think he did very well. Remember, you take the witnesses as they are that are there. And this is somebody who was right there in the thick of it. And he testified. First of all, did you notice in the last few questions that King's lawyer was able to elicit from this witness what she was not allowed to put on at the beginning of the morning when the judge excluded the testimony that he was wearing a pink shirt? She was able to bring a picture and show what her client was wearing at the time outside the club. And Mr. Collins just identified that, yes, it was he wearing a pink shirt outside the club. That was important for Mr. King. But what did we hear? We heard the most important thing is he didn't see anyone with a gun. He was close enough to see what was going on. And he never saw Barrow shoot the gun, have the gun, or anything like that. What he did say was he was on the other side of the commotion, and it was a lot of commotion. He couldn't hear everything because the prosecutor was trying to imply he was lying. He didn't say when he heard Barrow saying bad words or bad things. Well, the truth is, he said it was so chaotic and a lot of commotion, he couldn't hear every word. I think that was very honest.
Now, Jayne, I could play devil's advocate here and say, isn't this guy just good friends with all three of them? And isn't it so convenient that he didn't hear any words that were exchanged, but he could definitely pinpoint the fact that neither of these three individuals, well, definitely not Mr. King and definitely not Mr. Barrow, are shooters. Didn't seem he was so convinced about Mr. Smith, but couldn't it just be, hey, he's friends with them and he's not a credible witness? I mean, then again, the defense just put on their case and we don't know what other witnesses they're going to put forward. But what do you think?
The prosecutor didn't show any reason for this guy to lie, other than the fact he was a friend with all of them. He was friends with the victim as well, don't forget. He was so close that he walked right over to her. He knew, or he thought it was Maisha, not Beatrice. But the point being, he was friends with both sides. But that's who the witnesses, the eyewitnesses would be. That's who the witnesses were for the state as well. Everybody knew everybody that was there. They're all in a very small knit group. But he didn't show any bias, for me, why he would lie.
Now, if we see a continuation where the defense puts on more witnesses, and I know we're going to be hearing from Mr. Scott, this player that this central figure in this case who was brought, we kind of heard a little bit when the defense was doing their opening arguments, that this was a man who was right next to Mr. Barrow during this whole event and said that he can positively identify the fact that he was not a shooter, he was taking cover. If the defense keeps putting forward these witnesses who say that none of these men are the shooters, how is a jury really supposed to dissect who's saying what? I mean, it's not like you have people, I'm kind of iffy. No, you have people say he was definitely the shooter, and then people say he was definitely not the shooter. So what do we do here as a jury?
That's what a reasonable doubt is. Would you take the testimony of these people, all of them, and be able to rely on them in the most important aspect of your life?
Is that a question?
None of them. And so if you can't, a reasonable doubt is a doubt you can attach a reason to. Who knows? This person said that he saw Barrow put his hands up and say, who the F is doing this shooting, and duck. You know, it was very fast. It was very quick. Boom, boom, boom. Very fast. You have people in the dark. There's no light. Lots of people are wearing black t-shirts. Let's be honest. They're young people in a nightclub. How many you think are standing out wearing neon colors? None. They're wearing dark clothing. They're outside. It's quick. And it's hard to identify. And this is a tragedy.
It is definitely a tragedy. I agree with you there. Now, the idea that, okay, it was chaotic, and I think what was interesting when we first started this case, we were really looking to see that surveillance footage or cell phone footage that would kind of identify what happened. We saw the body cam footage from police officers. I have to tell you, if anything, it added more confusion. I couldn't tell what was happening. What it did show to me, and I think it might have showed to the jurors, that this was chaos, that it was a chaotic event, but it didn't help me establish any which way what was happening. Did you feel the same way?
Of course I did. And remember, the body cams are after the shooting. So when it comes to, that's why the first 2 days all we saw were casings and bullets and wounds. We didn't see the identity of who was shooting because the police come up after. And Jesse, what about the fact that Javon Collins says they were questioned by the police the next morning? The police didn't care what they had to say. You know, I can't help but say, I'm sure that's true. As terrible as it is to say. If you think that the prosecutor knew that that statement was false, you can bet that he would be calling the police officer, and I guess we'll see what comes in rebuttal to say that's not true. But if not, I think that's a bad thing for the prosecution.
I thought it was surprising that the first time, and correct me, I didn't hear this at all earlier in the trial, and I'm not sure anybody else did. We hear that for the first time possibly, that there's this person named John who handed Mr. Smith, who's one of the defendants, a gun. Where did that was put over by cross-examination by the state, that all of a sudden, what we thought was the idea, or at least what we heard from other witnesses, that Mr. Smith handed Barrow a gun, they started firing. Now all of a sudden, we hear this John is the one who handed Smith a weapon. What did you think of that when you heard that?
I wondered if he was sure what he was saying, number one, if it was a misstep. And then I thought, maybe this is coming from the witness who changed his mind and recanted and wouldn't testify.
Right.
And sitting in mess up Jovan Collins. That's what I think. I think he was just trying to get that testimony in somehow, but he was not successful.
Yeah. Let's play a little bit of the testimony from one of the surviving victims. This is Nathaniel Kendrick, another key witness for the state, but again, a question of credibility, because there is a difference between what this gentleman testified to in court and what his deposition, or with the police, or what his earlier deposition or his police interviews have said.
He couldn't identify them before.
Right. So let's play a little bit of that right now, and then Jayne and I will talk a little bit about it.
It was a lot.
You remember on October 27, 2015, the police coming to talk to you?
Somewhat.
Kind of fuzzy?
Yeah.
I want to ask you a little bit about the effect. Let me ask you this. Do you know which of them fired the gun that shot you?
Quan, I was standing directly in front of him.
What effect has being shot had on your day-to-day life?
Like, I can't work right now. And, like, from broken ribs, multiple surgeries, and living my life with guilt because an innocent woman lost a life that didn't have anything to do with anything. The situation wasn't even that serious to even have guns involved.
Can you lift things, Mr. Kendrick?
It depends.
That week, what kind of work were you doing?
I was working in signature brand, packaging, loading.
You load?
No, not right now.
Do you have any back problems?
Yes, sir.
Tell the jury about your back problems.
Well, I have a long scar on my back from when the police was pumping on me. It broke all my ribs. And I got wire, a whole bunch of wire. They wired my ribs up. It's like if I touch it like this, like if you touch a ball and how the lightning go on the ball, that's how when I touch this, that's how I feel.
Did the bullet go through you?
Yes, sir.
Your Honor?
Yes, sir.
You remember there being a time closer to September where an officer came to talk to you? You remember writing Ware's sister on a note in the hospital?
Like, I think that's before I went into the coma. They kept asking me, I think, like, who was shooting. But I wrote on the paper, like, they couldn't, like, really tell what I was writing at first. And, like, where's my sister? Because I remember her being shot and her getting dragged away from somebody, by somebody.
Do you think that she may have been the one who had died? Do you remember if they told you that she was okay?
I think so. I think.
Did you know Benitria Robinson? I have nothing further.
Mr. Bankowitz.
Thank you, Judge.
Well, that's the testimony of one of the surviving victims in this case that we're covering out of Florida, the case of Laquan Barrow, Michael Smith, and Gary King, who are each charged with one count of second-degree murder in the death of 19-year-old Benitria Robinson and several counts of attempted second-degree murder. There's a break right now, a mid-morning break. As soon as we do have a feed, we're going to make sure to go back to it. I'm joined today by Jayne Weintraub. Now, Jayne, you heard, we were just playing a little bit of the testimony of Nathaniel Kendrick. He's one of the surviving victims. Really tough to hear his testimony, but at the same point, in terms of credibility, let's not forget that he identified Mr. Barrow, Mr. King, and Mr. Smith as the shooters. However, in his initial police interview, in his initial police investigation, he didn't identify King or Smith as the shooters. So again, what do you make of this, and how is the jury supposed to make this?
I think that they should see what it is. And what it is at the calm when he's just shown the photographs, 6 pictures of each that have one of each of the defendants, he was not able to identify the shooter. That's without any influence. As the case progresses, now these 3 are arrested. Now he looks at them and says, they're the ones that did it.
But how much is that a danger in this case, in cases in general, when people are trying to remember what happened, and then as soon as more details actually emerge in the news and they identify defendants, you said, oh, you know what, maybe that is the person who actually committed this crime. Isn't that a danger?
Of course it's a danger, especially when you're looking at them spending the rest of their lives in prison. You're going to rely on Nathaniel Kendrick when they elicit all this emotional, which it is, of course, emotional testimony saying, he was beaten, every rib was broken, did the gunshot go through you? What are you feeling now? I mean, it's heart-wrenching testimony to listen to. You want someone to be held accountable. You want it to be that man there. But is it? That's the question.
Jayne, we talked a little bit earlier about the lack of DNA evidence really linking these 3 men to the crime. It really is an instance where it's all testimony. What we do know, or what seems to be that the prosecution has established, is that it's possible 3 guns were fired here, that there were 3 separate guns used in this shooting. Now, if you're a jury and you're listening to this and you think, okay, if 3 guns were fired and there's 3 defendants, how likely is it that at least one of these guys is not the shooter? And do you think that plays anything for the jury here, that idea of 3 guns, 3 defendants?
I think it does, especially, our climate in Brevard County. It's pretty hot at night. When this happened, you have a lot of perspiration. Perspiration on guns is perfect, or the bullet casings, when you're loading those bullets, perfect for DNA. And there is none. So what does that say? I mean, I think today in our technical worlds, we're all very aware of that kind of evidence, and eyewitness identification is clearly the least reliable identification process available. I would only hope that the defense would call an expert to testify to that.
Yeah, that was my next question for you. We see the beginning part of the defense's move here. Now remember, we have 3 defendants, 3 separate attorneys. We know that Mr. Barrow is first putting on his case. What do you anticipate these three attorneys going to do as they move forward today? I think we do, correct me, this is possible, we might see the conclusion of testimony today. So what do you anticipate for the rest of the day?
I do think we're going to see the rest of the defense case today. I don't think we're going to see Mr. Barrow testify. And I think that, might be a spillover as well. If only one defendant testifies and the others don't, I think that the jurors always wonder about that, even though the judge gives a very cautionary instruction, that someone has the right to take the witness stand on their own behalf or not. Of course, he's referring to the Fifth Amendment. You don't have to testify against yourself. However, some people want to testify in their own behalf. And then, of course, the dilemma is, does the jurors go back there and listen to what the judge said? Or do they think, well, if I was accused of a crime I didn't commit, I'd sure want to tell them. That's a dilemma. I think that the rest of the testimony for the day will be similar to Mr. Collins. And of course, just so you know, that the reason that Mr. Barrow goes first is he's the first named in the indictment. And it goes by the way of indictment unless the lawyers agree otherwise.
And what about these separate juries? They're both going to have to go back and determine what to do. One of the juries is assigned to Mr. King, the other two assigned to Mr. Barrow and Smith. Do you think that it's possible that we see conflicting verdicts?
I hope not, but that is always possible. That's why there is a separate jury for Mr. King.
Yeah, it's very interesting to see how that happens. We are anticipating or waiting for live coverage, live testimony back in that courtroom. But in the meantime, I actually want to play for all of us